We're here today for the Board of Education to hear a challenge to an educational resource of the book Salvage the Bones by Jesmond Ward for use in a 12th grade AP Literature course at Northern Guilford High School.
Dr. Oakley and school board members, thank you for allowing me to speak today, even if I just got confirmation of this meeting a little over 24 hours ago. And I'm a mother of 5 children. 3 of my daughters have graduated from Northern. I have a senior at Northern who has chosen to take honors English this year, so she doesn't have to deal with discrimination and bullying because of her moral beliefs regarding this book. My husband and I tried to get her to leave Northern, but since it was her senior year, she chose to stay, and we supported her. My last child would have been a sophomore, but we pulled him out of Northern this year because of the declining academic standard and garbage and filth that is tolerated in this school and this county. I used to love Northern and the community created around this school and had always been very supportive and happy with the decisions of the teachers and administration at Northern de Guilford High School. I can no longer say this. This book challenge has opened my eyes to seeing what the administration is allowing and condoning at Northern and Guilford County schools. Your complacency and woke ideology is resulting in increased truancy and discipline, as well as behavior issues. An increase in fighting, a decrease in respect for authority, and a lowering of academic rigor is creating an atmosphere difficult for students to learn. There is a culture being introduced, encouraged in this school, and things have changed in the last few years. It all starts with what we are allowing to infiltrate into our school and our children's young minds. Last spring, when I was made aware of this book, I was shocked, disgusted, and appalled when reading it. Now, in case some of you haven't completed the entire book or have only read bits and pieces, I wanted to share with you a couple of the most inappropriate, disturbing, and explicit texts from this book between one of the main characters, Esh, who's a 15-year-old female child, and Manny, who is a 19-year-old adult male. He grabs my hand and pulls it toward him, wraps my fingers around his dick. Not too bad, he says. I want to know what it feels like, so I reach out under the water to touch his chest. His nipples the size of red grapes. They're much softer than that. The skin and the seams of his muscles is the color of sugar daddy caramel candy. Manny pulls away. What are you doing? His dick slides out of my hand, hot in the cool water, then gone. Been thinking about you, says Manny, and then he has pushed me back into the stall, closed it behind us, grabbed my arms, and turned us so that he is sitting on the toilet. He unzips his pants, and I grab his dick, hard enough to hurt. I want it to hurt. He doesn't wince, intent on my loose shorts. He pulls me down on him, so I'm straddling him. Then he is inside. It is easy and wet. He grips my shoulders, pulls me hard down, and rolls back away from me. Pulls me down again, his face in my chest. It's the first time he's grabbed me over my waist, kept his hands on me closer to my face, and touched me. Wait, he says, and then he is making me stand up, pulling off my shorts and underwear, bearing back down on me. My clothes catch on one ankle, hang like they're half pinned from a clothesline. We've never done it like this. His hands are on my ass, and he tries to look down to see, but it brings us face to face. Fuck, yells Manny, and he's throwing me off of him. I hit the door behind me, the rough cat tongue of his face gone, and I grip steel, air, nothing. He is zipping his pants, folding me into the corner of the stall when he opens it, leaving me standing in the dark bathroom, runny at the legs, breasts aching with bloom. These are just 2 examples among many graphic and inappropriate texts in this book. If this isn't pornography, I'm not sure what is. I have heard several times in these challenge meetings that this book isn't pornography because it wasn't the author's intent to arouse students reading it. But really, how can that be proved by any teacher or administration to what the author's intent was, as well as what's going on in the minds of 17 and 18-year-old students who are reading this book? What happens in the head of a student who struggles with pornography or sexual violence toward others with thoughts of rape, or a student who has been raped or sexually abused? What decent adult thinks that this is profitable for education? The teacher and committee members defend the choice because an alternative book was offered. The student who chooses an alternative is expected to go to the media center when the book is being discussed. Segregating students who choose to read an alternative book is not an acceptable solution. There are hundreds of other books to choose from that are far more uplifting and challenging to their young minds. It seems to me that it would make more sense for the teacher to choose a book from the AP College Board list that would be suitable for all students to read, that leaves out profanity and pornographic images. I'm not here to undermine authority, but to remind the paid staff and administration that you are role models and should be held to a higher standard. You are responsible for what you allow our children to be reading and learning in the walls of our public schools. Northern teachers are offering, disseminating, and making available that which is obscene. They consent and allow minors to peruse harmful material to their young minds. How are the students of Northwest managing to successfully complete AP English without having to read this sexually explicit book? Ms. Harris, our media specialist, said, and I'll quote, "If this book is banned, Northern could lose their ability for students to receive AP English credit for AP Literature this year. Students might not be able to take the AP exam or get credit that they are working towards," end quote. Now, how does Northwest keep their AP status without assigning this book? Committee members suggest that since our kids are watching far worse on social media, that this somehow justifies this book. Where's the logic in that? My point is, in AP English, I want slightly more challenging material than a social media level book. When the school and the school board introduce mature and explicit material to our kids without seeking our permission first, it's unconscionable. These are minors and they don't belong to you, despite what you think. In my daughter's forensic class, parental consent had to be signed to watch a PG-13 movie. However, my other daughter's AP English class, there was no consent form for her to read this obscene book. There is no continuity in your standard. There is a breakdown in our system when adults think that this kind of material is acceptable to allow in our schools. We aren't here to dismantle public education, but must repair and restore that which has been broken and corrupt. We need to step up and do better for our children and our young adults. Let's refuse to let the trends of this world shape and define us. This book should never have been introduced into an AP English class to read and should be taken out of the curriculum immediately. And I'll leave you with this quote by Booker T. Washington. "A lie doesn't become truth, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it's accepted by the majority."
Of the parents from Northern who is challenging Salvage the Bones as a resource in the AP English class. This process has been frustrating and shocking. At times I thought I must have read a different book. I can't help but think of the scripture where it describes futile thinking. Although the committee members claim to be wise, they have become fools, defending evil and calling it good. Knowledge without wisdom is how you defend Salvage the Bones as an excellent choice for an AP English class. I am also surprised, not really, that I was just informed of the meeting yesterday. It just confirms to me that this process is unfair and that you're really not interested in dissent, discussion, or debate. We have never been granted answers to any of the questions and basic complaints that we have asked. Our main question all along has been, what value does the explicit material add to this book? Quote, "Literary text may contain mature content and themes including sexual acts and controversial themes, but are chosen based on their literary merit." That's from Guilford County Schools' statement on text. Everyone so far who has defended Salvage as having literary value has done so with very weak and pitiful logic. For example, Mrs. Weaver, the teacher who assigned it last year, claims The book has literary value because teens like it and it won an award. I would hope that educators had better logical skills than their opinion or what teens like. Salvage the Bones goes way beyond acceptable or useful to the story sexual descriptions. The explicit content offers no benefit or value to the message of this book. Why has nobody addressed that point? There are many books that would satisfy the purpose of exposing students to perspectives unlike or in opposition to their own in order to analyze complex themes and to promote individual reflection. The reason, and I don't believe it's because it is well-written, thoughtful, complex, insightful, or appropriate. Perhaps it is as Wallace from Northern's MTAC stated, is it about AP credit or cultivating young minds? That was a quote. Another serious question that has never been addressed is, what if a male teacher assigned this book? Would there have been any pushback due to the explicit content, the sexual content especially? Would this book qualify as sexual harassment if there were open conversation in the classroom? Despite repeated claims that the sexual content was never discussed in the classroom, does anyone really believe that it didn't foster perhaps some unfruitful conversation in or outside of the classroom? Should I remind you that a staff member from Guilford County Schools, Northern's coaching staff, was arrested last year in September for felony indecent liberties of a Northern student? This book goes into great detail about illicit sex between a 15-year-old girl and a 19-year-old man. I wonder if the charges against that former employee were as crude as the text of this book that our students are reading. The GCS Parent Handbook has consequences to staff for sexual harassment and discrimination. This book qualifies for both. You are aware of your handbook and you should respect your own rules. Quote, sexually harassing conduct includes sexually suggestive written materials. How can any reasonable adult not see salvage as including sexually written materials? The handbook also describes discrimination. When my child chooses to read an alternate because of her academic and moral standards and then has her, quote, educational performance, opportunities, or benefits adversely affected, end quote, she's being discriminated against. There is no way around that other than you just don't care. There is a reckoning for everyone who has been made aware of this book yet refuses to put any restrictions on it. You're not protecting our children. Is there a possibility that one day you will have to give an account to someone higher than yourself? When you are weighed in the balance, will you be found wanting? A common defense from the teacher, the student on the committee, and committee members have been, well, nobody was forced to read the obscene excerpts if they chose to read the book. Or, if they wanted, they could do an alternate. So when the teacher has to caveat an assignment with, there are graphic sexual scenes that you may want to skip over, that could be your first clue to pick a different book. I would ask that the teacher assign books that are not this level of objectionable. And I would also ask that all students are able to freely participate without their conscience and their values being compromised. Where is the concern for my students' rights? Where's the diversity, inclusion, and equity for those students? Is it fair to segregate those students while the rest of the class is discussing the literary value of a promiscuous 12-year-old child? Are those students not entitled to learn and be taught AP-level instruction? If a student has a legitimate objection to filling their mind with garbage, they should be heard, respected, and honored, not discriminated against. Procedures for selection of educational resources from Guilford County School Board of Education says, quote, the administration is committed to receiving input from the faculty, staff, students, parents, and the community in the selection of educational resources, end quote. It appears that that is being ignored. I tried unsuccessfully to obtain a syllabus from different high schools in Guilford County. It is curious as to why several of them would not give me access to it. Where's the transparency? I was, however, able to obtain a copy of Northwest syllabus. It seems they're not using salvage, but rather chose books that I believe are mature, but also advanced. Are those students going to be less prepared for the real world in college-level classes, as salvage defenders have said in every other committee meeting we've had? I'd be willing to bet they'll be better prepared. It would be interesting to see if there's a difference in AP scores between the two schools. You as board members should want to know an answer to those questions. Why is it hard for you to understand that most parents just want you to teach our children the importance of learning to read and write well? We value that over whatever cultural route you try to impose. When will you understand it's not your job to open our children's eyes to your version of what's normal, acceptable, and good? They are our children. Examine your hearts and root out those things that are not useful or that offend. Put away those things that are culturally acceptable and foolish, but deep down you know they're corrupt, harmful, and divisive. As those in positions of authority, you must discern that which is right, profitable, and acceptable for learning, with teaching compassion and imparting wisdom. Don't be partakers of perversion, obscenity, or objectionable material. How crude does a work have to be before you would disapprove? Again, I've asked that question twice now with no answer. I've been accused of wanting to ban books. That was and is disingenuous. I am just asking that you not use it in an assigned AP English class because my child's entitled to a full year of AP instruction, not a sit in the corner and teach yourself for the 4 or 5 weeks that the class is discussing this other book. Segregating the students based on personal beliefs and convictions is wrong. If you want to put it in the library or even suggest it as a supplemental resource in the classroom, you have the right to do that. The parent can then decide if they want their child to read it. If it's in the library, I would also suggest putting an explicit sign on it. While I'm discussing the whole book banning thing that I've been accused of, why is it okay for the MTAC coordinator at Northern to admit that when, quote, looking at the AP list, I felt like a lot were written by white men, a couple by black men. There just weren't a lot written by black women. And I thought, anyway, I liked this one, end quote. Does that statement satisfy the Guilford County Board of School criteria for selection of educational resources? Quote, the staff must use professional selection criteria and educational relevance rather than personal opinions, values, and beliefs in the selection of resources, end quote. So do we judge by outward appearance? Are we banning books that weren't written by black women? I can't imagine Guilford County is that narrow-minded. This really shouldn't be that hard. All I am asking is that you afford my child the same rights in education as those children whose parents do not have the same standards. Assign books that are a stretch intellectually. I want a teacher and staff who work for us to assign books that are at or above my child's reading level, but do not include obscene and explicit material. I want my child to be other-focused and not egocentric as she understands her place in the world. Parents should discuss what's going on in the world with their children and make them aware of those who are not as lucky, sheltered, or blessed. I want and desire my child to have concern for others and to make a positive difference. Those things can be accomplished with love, tenderness, and respect. My point is that it is not hard to find books that satisfy the AP requirements and my wishes and parental authority. I respectfully ask that you remove this book from the assigned AP class and choose a book that does not shock, offend, or dumb down. Inclusion of the entire class is fair, right, and benefits all, while at the same time fosters a healthy and robust learning experience. As you weigh your decision, I ask that you abound in every good work. Do everything in your power to not offend. Have the courage to do what you know is right, and respect all perspectives. Thank you. Any discussion? Deborah?
Where to start? Of course, the challenge to this book did begin in my district, in District 5, which is Northern High School is a part of. And from day one, my goal with representation has been to put aside my own opinions on what happens unless it is directly related to my children, in which case it would not be an appropriate venue here. So let me just go ahead and put right out there that I have received numerous emails, and the vast, vast majority have been in favor of keeping open all options for reading materials. Some of them have been emails directly related to Salvage the Bones. So, the majority of them have been more a general statement to please not dismiss, ban, or otherwise censure any books, and to leave the choices open for especially adult learners, because at senior level. We're talking 17, 18-year-olds, old enough to enlist in the military, old enough to take life, old enough to make their own decisions on what they read and what they don't, old enough to make their own medical choices. Leave these choices open for the adults that are taking these classes, and as they head on to college, they would take that framework with them and leave those choices open to the parents who reside in my district to converse with their child and make those decisions together.
Diane?
We try to hide the fact that our kids are actually more savvy than we give them credit for. I mean, most of us in here who have young children, if you don't know how to use this, you can hand it to your 8-year-old and say, figure this out for me. That means that if an 8-year-old can figure out how to use a cell phone, that means a 17 or 18-year-old does know about sex.
I mean, I'm sure they know about sex. A 17 and 18-year-old knows about sex. If our young people know about alcohol and they've maybe taken a drink, so should the school give them some beer?
Books that dealt with very harsh social issues, war, these books are there, right?
Yes.
Okay, and these books are used sometimes for discussion with our students, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have to be a broader group as far as exposure to what we have. I think that if you want a library that only has a certain number of kinds of books, then that's where private schools or charter schools can fill the bill as us, instead of us. My point is that are we just scared of sex here? Or are we, also concerned about other books that talk about violence, and we are a very violent society, and we haven't banned those books. Even the Bible has violence in it. So if you're going to start banning them, let's start from there and move forward. And sex, yeah, well, I'm glad you know there was sex in the Bible. Okay, so, and to his point, I mean, some of the sex was not consensual. Okay, so, we can't box our kids in from learning.
The author talk about the storyline of the book. And I thought the story really was about them preparing for Katrina, and her brother in this dog fighting, which to me, that was very graphic, and learning about dog fighting. It was not a lot about Esh. She liked, that young man. But I just, I actually got so aware as an adult, I really couldn't read this book. This would not have been a book of my personal choice. That's a good thing, that this book can open up all those dynamics.
We, as parents, just need to talk with our kids and share with our kids things that they're going to learn in the future, and hopefully they'll make the right decisions. Thank you.
I think the question comes down to, this is extremely graphic on multiple levels. We are talking about, touching genitalia. We're talking about body fluids going down legs. Like the parents asked, at what point are we crossing the line? There again, children up until 18 are under the parents' guidance, okay? But, at what point the education system has moved their level of acceptable sexuality, in my view, to a higher standard at this point. I looked up the book on Amazon, and the first negative, and I don't agree 100% with this parent's view of it, but this was a a parent of color. First one I got when I looked up the book to look at the review. But what she says, I bought the book for my high school daughter. The school had this listed on her reading list, and I chose it because it was the only one they offered that was about people of color. I regretted that decision. This book portrays Black Americans as dirty, and I don't agree with it, but that's her view, oversexed, and as thieves and alcoholics. Although this book is written by a person of color, it is fiction and leaves a very bad taste about Black people. Though the Black race has suffered great poverty and oppression, as a whole, they have done so with dignity. I think this book is a disgraceful representation of Black American family. If anyone is wondering, these several scenarios with detailed graphic sexual scenes, my daughter told me it made her sick and read it. And then don't have your kids read this book. If you're looking for a true and honorable representation of Black American lives, I would suggest I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And the reason I read this is everybody wants to assume that these few parents are objective to this book. Okay? This woman told her whole family and friends not to read this book. Where do we cross the line into too graphic of, for me, that was pretty graphic. How graphic does it have to become before it becomes unacceptable? Lots of other books.
I want us to look at the influence of public schools. Public schools' broadness and the broadness of its experience have brought us together in this room. Because if it had not been for public school, we wouldn't see the level of people being introduced to people that are not like them. Now, a child can pick up a book about so many different things that may or may not be on TV, may or may not be discussed in their family homes. I would hope that when I hear some of what I've heard people say, that the fact that you allow your child to come to public school means that maybe your household is broader in its thinking than what it appears from your presentation here.
A couple of months after they graduate, they're going to enter college, and they will have the same type of book to be read. Are the parents going to ask for that book to be banned? But instead, the parents can also ask for an alternative book or assignment. So that's another way that you can look at it as parents. Ask for the alternative assignment for your child if you disagree with the book.
I'll vote to leave it in. I think the challenging texts are good. I think there are options for parents to choose other that exist in a variety of contexts in our school system.
And you'll be surprised at the people that are horrified that I own these books. I owned this book before this came to the board. I own Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. I own Looking for Alaska. Why? Because I acknowledge and I know that someday these students and these children of mine will have these books before them, and I will know what's in them before they lay their hands on them. When this book was put into this AP curriculum, the teacher gave a multitude of options. Read it in its entirety with the knowledge that it has physically and sexually explicit content in it. What does the explicit content add to this book, and is there educational relevance? And I believe the answer to that question is yes, for the simple reason that you are absolutely right. This is a completely inappropriate relationship between a 15-year-old girl and a 19-year-old boy. She is absolutely taken advantage of in this book. This was a very, very hard read for me, because this could be any young, especially African-American woman in Guilford County? How many of them had their homes torn apart when the tornadoes came through? How many of them already lived in poverty before what little they had was taken from them? How many of them had someone reach out to them sexually in a manner that is not okay? These books with this content are hard to read. And I'm glad that the students could opt out of it if they wanted to, because, it's hard to read. But it can also open the conversation. Has this ever happened to you? Do you know someone this is happening to? If you do, please know this is not okay. You can leave out the explicit content and look at the poverty that people live in these rural areas and say, we can help. Before you can change things for the better, these help realize the worse. It is hard to read, and it is hard to imagine what it would be like to be a 15-year-old girl with no female influence in your life at the time, losing everything right down to the clothes off your back in a hurricane, and thinking, what am I going to do with a baby? By the time I got to the end, hey, here we go. You know me, y'all. I'm halfway in tears. Looking at this going, I want to help her.
There was an elementary school at Claxton, and because of my faith and beliefs, we don't leave children her age alone with men ever. You remember that, Jill? And the gym teacher, or PE teacher, was a man. And so she had to sit in the office. And I called the district and talked to Jill. This was 17 years ago. And she had to sit in the office. There was no alternative. There was no female PE teacher. Because we just don't leave female children that age alone with men, not even their fathers, because of the abuse that largely all children suffer, but largely and predominantly females. And she just had to sit in the office, and I had to talk to her about that and said, this was just what it is. And, whether it's right or fair, or she was entitled to have physical recreation, like everyone else, wasn't, were things that we had to talk about because that's just how things were and probably still are. I watched The Woman King this weekend, and it was incredibly gut-wrenching watching a slave trader fondle Black women's breasts that they were purchasing. And I would rather not watch that. But it's important to know what people did and what people went through, because it gives us incredible opportunities to instill persistence, perseverance, discipline, and to stay the course for things that you believe in. And Dina, yes, so that passes by a vote of 6-2.